And welcome back. We are getting ready to venture off into our first segment, of course, very important conversation. The Caribbean Development Bank projects that are being rolled out as we speak, Belize Bureau of Standards and Citrus Growers Association. In with us is Andrea Power, of course, who is the coordinator for regional cooperation and integration from Caribbean Development Bank. Henry Anderson, who is the CEO at Citrus Growers Association, and Jose Trejo, who is the director, Belize Bureau of Standards. Guys, good morning, welcome, you're looking good, and thank you for being with us.
Good morning.
Good morning. Thank you.
So let's start off the conversation. Andrea, you are currently in country, and we have two of your beneficiaries here to talk about the projects that are being funded through the CDB. Let's just do an overall summary as to the ongoing work and the priority areas currently for the bank.
Okay, great. Thank you so much for having us here this morning. Now, I think people would be aware that the bank has had a very long and very fruitful relationship and partnership with Belize. And certainly if you look around, many of your road projects are actually being funded through the Caribbean Development Bank. These particular projects form part of what we call the EU's, the European Union's 10th EDF, it's the European Development Fund. And there are two standby facilities or two technical assistance facilities. One is for the Economic Partnership Agreement, the EPA, that we hear so much about, and the other one is for the CARICOM Single Market and Economy, CSME. These two projects are being funded through the Economic Partnership Agreement facility. And it's really about helping countries to access these agreements, helping our private sectors to really penetrate the European Union markets. And these two projects really are part of that. And what we're really seeking to do in this particular case, we're building capacity. So it's all well and fine to tell our private sector the markets are there, go out there and trade, but do you have the enabling environment to ensure that your private sectors can do that? It forms part of the overall strategy of the bank to support inclusive growth. We are all about poverty reduction, and we're doing that through inclusive growth and sustainable development. The enhancement of the private sector to drive that growth is extremely important. And so that's why we've partnered with the European Union to make these funds available. We've also added our own funds through the Caribbean Technological Consultancy Services, CTCS. So for each of these two projects, we've matched EU funds with bank funds to actually maximize the impact of the projects.
Now, when you talk about, obviously as a regional coordinator, you're able to give a good assessment as to the landscape across the Caribbean. Where do you see Belize fitting in terms of our readiness to be able to tap into CSME and European markets?
I think that Belize has a wonderful opportunity to not only penetrate the CARICOM markets and the EU markets, but Belize, as I've said before in previous assignments, is very strategically positioned geographically. So Belize is really, in the rest of CARICOM, their window to Central America. And Belize is also the window for Central America to CARICOM and to the wider EU. The projects in question, I think, are very good examples as to how not only can Belize increase their exports to CARICOM and the EU, but Belize can also export the services that these projects are actually going to increase their capacity to do. So if you're talking about testing, Belize now can be a center of excellence when it comes to accredited testing services, especially those services that support industry. So you have your citrus industry, you have your sugar industry, they all use weights and measures and very sophisticated equipment. Your Bureau of Standards is going to be augmented to be able to provide not only world-class testing services, but accredited testing services, because we live in a world of accreditation. And with CGA, I feel very invested emotionally in the CGA story and the fact that they are on the cutting edge of research to deal with the HLB greening disease, which affects citrus worldwide. So again, once the CREI lab is accredited, this is actually not only a defense against the disease, but it sets Belize up as the go-to place for testing. So this for me is, I think, huge and is a perfect example of how Belize can tap into those markets.
That is such a great segue into the project itself and the current the training that is taking place. Henry, talk to us about what this accreditation process and the training that comes along with it will mean for the lab that is established for the CG already.
Okay, well, the project does two things for us. It's for the accreditation of the lab, ISO 17025, and it's also for ISO 9001 2015 certification for a plant world nursery. So it's actually two elements of our value chain. As Andrea just said, right now, the CREI lab provides HLB testing has done some work for Honduras, it has done some work for Jamaica, for Grenada, has done training for the FAO. So what this allows us to do is it improves our quality management system to an international level. And when you look at citrus accreditation labs, you don't have many, because in terms of the United States, you have USDA and they don't follow ISO. But when you come out of that, CREI, the Citrus Research and Education Institute, is really a one-of-a-kind institution. It's about 55 years old. It used to be an arm of UWI. So this sets us up to be able to make our industry more competitive. Our growers and stakeholders know that when they get a result from the lab, it's a result that is internationally verified, it's valid. We're not getting false negatives or false positives and things like that. Plus, it sets the stage to allow us to attract equity investment to our industry. Okay. In the terms of the plant world side of it, the engine of the citrus industry is the growing of plants. Without the fruits, you don't have the need for the factories and everything. As you guys may know, with the Huang Longbing disease, production has fallen in Belize, but it has not fallen at the rate you have in Florida, for example, which has been dramatic. For example, last year, Florida had 81 million boxes of oranges. This year, they're doing 68. Last year we did 3.2. We still have a couple days to go, and we're around 3.17, and that's Hurricane Earl in there. So what we're seeing is the work of the lab and the researchers there and the agronomists has assisted the growers in taking the strategies to maybe stop that downturn, and we're getting ready to go up. In the case of Plant World Nursery, it has put out about nearly 300,000 plants into the industry over the last year and a half. And that's now allowing, or in the last 2 years actually, so next year you'll start feeling the pinch of that. So we're actually improving our competitiveness. We make a plant for $3 thereabouts, or a little less. If you go to Florida, just to give you a comparison, it's $8.50 US to $9. So all of these allow us to be more efficient in what we do.
Now, let's take a moment to just talk about the work of the Research Institute and some of the successes that you have had. When you talk about citrus greening, it is a challenge across the globe. And I know that the Citrus Research Institute has been working for quite some time, along with farmers as well, to be able to look at how to mitigate the effects. What are some of the successes that you have had that with the additional accreditation will set you completely apart?
Well, when you look at HLB, that you're asking about, it's a four-pronged approach for dealing with HLB. And the main one, if there's a main one, it would be controlling the vector. So what CREI has done, again with the support of the FAO, and with all of the growers, have worked to put the industry in 4 units, if you will, citrus production management areas. And then we coordinate with the growers to spray for the psyllids all at the same time. Essentially, the rationale is this. The psyllids are attracted to the young shoots on the tree. Okay? The psyllid is the vector that transmits the bacteria that causes HLB. So like how they spray for mosquitoes, you have to spray for them as well. But because you're dealing with nature, or Mother Nature, you don't want to be spraying and having a lot of collateral damage. So what you do is you spray just before the rain starts and the shooting is a lot, because then the psyllid population is small and the beneficial insects population are small as well. So when we come in and do it, now we have been tracking data over the last, I believe from 2011, and we could have shown a graph, and I think in the past we've shown it, where we aim to get like half a psyllid per tree. And for most of the time, on the average for the groves that participate, they are below that threshold, which is something very, very good for us, despite the, the resource limitations and access to financing that some of the growers have and things of that nature.
it's refreshing for me, or then again for the entire country, to know that CGA has been doing some international work for, of course, other countries. That's a refreshing thought. So I'd like to say congratulations on that. But moving over to Jose, talk to us about the impact of this project to the Belize Bureau of Standards.
Okay, well, first let me just say I think that this is the first project that we've actually worked the players, not only the service provider, but also the beneficiaries of the service, in terms of ensuring that the delivery of service, whether you're a producer, is improved. I think that one of the things we forget is the value chain system. If we don't understand the value chain system and how quality infrastructure is important to the value chain system, that's where we have challenges in terms of improving the quality of the product that we have in the marketplace. So my input can be the outputs, or my output can be his input. So if I don't have a system that guarantees that the requirements and the specifications that he needs is met, then it starts off going bad from the beginning. So, and that's the thing that we need to do across the entire country.
It's a shift in thinking, and we've seen it many times before. There's the production for local market, and then when you start thinking export, then you're ready to increase the standards. But there is oftentimes a cost that comes with being able to meet international standards. And I know that is one of the, we have entities like Beltrade and other agencies through the government that are trying to work with people. But how close do you feel that we are to having any person, even a new entrepreneur who wants to enter into some new service or product, that they can recognize that meeting the quality standards from the beginning is actually a better long-term vision for them?
Well, we work closely with Beltrade, and for new entrepreneurs through the Small Business Development Corporation, there's a link between us and Beltrade. So whenever someone is looking to enter the market with a new product, they would refer them to us in terms of what are some of the good manufacturing practices, the labeling requirements, anything to assist them to improve the product. But I think everything starts with policy, and I think that there's still somewhat of a disconnect, and I won't say how much of a disconnect there is, but I think that in terms of policy, we have several policies in the country. So we have agricultural policy, we have environmental policy, we have energy policy, and I think that one of the things that we're trying to do is to ensure that embedded in all those policies is quality infrastructure, and that is key, especially for the agricultural sector, which is, I mean, we know it's a major contributor to our gross domestic product. The improvement of grades of goods in terms of the agricultural sector, so your potato, your tomatoes, all of that, we're not there yet, but I think that the synergy is growing, and that I do hope that at some point in time, it is my hope that when you go to the supermarket, you will be able to see a grade A, grade B, grade C, potato, tomato,
I know what
carrots,
you're paying
broccoli,
for,
and I think that's the importance of what quality infrastructure brings.
If we could apply it to the citrus industry, and Jose touched on value chain, right? So you have, let's say, Plant World Nursery that puts out the plants, and by the end of the year, those will be certified plants. You have the Cry Lab that will be accredited for 5 tests. It has already gone through the formal process, so it's just filling out paperwork. That's dotting some T's and I's. Then you have CPBL, the processor. CPBL has ISO certification. It has BRC. If you look on one of the CPBL products, you will see the little ISO mark. When you're working in the international arena, and 98% of the product produced for citrus in juices are exported, right? You have things that they call technical barriers to trade. So the advanced countries out there, they're always finding what I call cute ways to prevent us from getting into the market. And some of it has to do with the ability of the labs and the processors to meet certain specifications. Now, when you talk, Jose mentioned, for example, policy. When you're, I think Andrea mentioned the quality manual. So we have a lab. We had people who are dedicated to doing the test the right way. But what ISO means, It means
That's
that
set down.
somebody can come and check that you do everything you say that you do. But it's not only about the actual protocol for testing. You have a policy that outlines how you will give customer service. That's what it is. But in there, the staff has to look at, you have to look at ethics, professionalism. Okay, so you will not, if the temperature for doing a pH test should be, let's say, 24 degrees Celsius. Well, they will record, and if it's not 24 degrees, you will do what you have to do. I'm not saying it's 24, I'm just using an example. You will have to ensure that it's within that acceptable limit.
Yeah.
Okay, so it changes not only maybe the way you do the testing, but it changes the mindset of the professionals in there. So it's when he says it's a culture change, it's a culture change to the big
Wouldn't it be
level.
wonderful if we just do things the way they should be done?
Yeah.
Well, you know,
And that is the essence of building standards. And it's not just for the professionals in the business, it's for those who are receiving the service or product as well.
you have ISO certification for government and corruption and things like that as well. You know, you can look up the standards. There's a standard for it.
Let me just ask very quickly in terms of where the CRI was before the accreditation, what type of changes you had to make internally to ensure that you would be accredited? Because with funding, obviously, you're able to do the training, get the equipment, produce your manual, but it does take an internal work ethic change that has to be implemented as well.
Listen, the lab this is the first lab in Belize, by the way, that will get ISO 0725 accreditation.
Congratulations.
And it's a big compliment to the people who are in the lab. It really meant that we had to go back and revisit everything we do. All right? A lot of the things were in place, but you had to make infrastructure changes. Okay, so you have a scale and the air conditioner shakes the scale a little bit. It's that sensitive. You need to do something to prevent that from happening. You need to make sure you have the right temperature in there. And I think when it comes to temperature, Hossein needs to talk about his fancy building he has.
That's
So-
because his mom, he's like, yes, I
Right.
have my first job.
We had to look at, calibration of certain
Yeah.
things in the lab at our level to make sure that, again, the scales are doing what they should do before he comes in to check them. The training was a big part of it. But we needed to go back to look at our policy, what we want to give, and then the processes. So, and it's not only the lab, because the ISO is about how you provide a service to the customer. So, somebody comes to want to test, our accounts people have to learn how they will need to ensure the payment is made, how they communicate it back. So it's across the value chain with
Timeliness of results.
the timeliness of the results. So everybody who is in that chain might not even be in the lab has to change how they operate and how they do things. All right.
Andrea, the issue we just spoke about in terms of meeting standards being an afterthought for some elements of the private sector, how common is this across the Caribbean?
It's very common because we all know how we first encounter the producers in our society. And we are in an environment where we have to transform the way in which we do business. And so we will have any number of small producers that have very good products.
Yeah.
I can think of any number of lines of pepper sauces, for example, that
Like Mary Sharp.
exactly. And everybody will have their favorite and they'll have their following and so on. So when you go to the supermarket, you are looking for your particular brand. The thing is, moving into the international environment, what sets that brand apart? You don't have major marketing money and that sort of thing. You have maybe the diaspora who will know of the product from home, but what else can speak to the consumer and say, this is a good product? So the whole question of standards and the kinds of certifications that you may be able to use in the private sector is what also gives you your competitive edge. But it is not only a steep learning curve, but it does take resources. And it's one thing to say to the private sector, especially small, medium-sized enterprises, where they will not have the wherewithal, for example, to pursue, I think it's ISO 22000 that those large factories might do. So they might more go towards HACCP, the hazard analysis, critical control point. So they might go more towards that. But it still takes resources. It takes resources, it takes training. You still have to ensure that you've got auditors in country that can support the process. But it's very important because we live in an environment where, because we're all part of a global value chain, whether we want to be or not, we import a lot of products, and from the time you're importing products, you become part of that international chain. If something goes wrong in the chain, how do you pull the product off the shelf? How do you know which product to pull? How do you know when that product was manufactured? So standards and quality assurance becomes very important, because that's what large companies use to kind of detect where something went wrong with if they realize something's gone wrong with a particular batch. They've got batch numbers, they've got documentation for each of those batches, and they know where those batches have gone,
what shelves they're on.
Precisely, so they can pull it. So it really is a very powerful tool for ensuring consumer safety and protection, but at the same time, lifting the competitive edge. So it may start with something as simple as labeling. So for instance, the nutritional analysis on your labels, everybody is health conscious and people want to be able to make informed decisions. So something as simple as being able to do the nutritional analysis and have that in your label.
Is there anywhere in the Caribbean that offers that?
I do believe that there is a lab in Trinidad and Tobago, Kariri. They do nutritional analysis. Then it's whether you're organic. I sing the praises of your cacao farmers here in Belize, and the cocoa that Belize puts out, quite frankly, is awesome. It's a super fine quality. Chocolatiers across the world have talked about the quality of Belize cacao, but then that's something that would warrant maybe a standard, because you wouldn't want any other set of people coming up and saying this thing is Belize cocoa when in fact it's not. So all of that, and so you might be thinking about some very simple things, but these are in fact ways in which businesses can distinguish themselves from the competitors. So that for me, I think is it's a steep learning curve, but because of the excellent products that we have here in the Caribbean, and I think second to none raw materials, it really is in our best interest to kind of keep pushing and keep sensitizing our farmers, our producers, our agro-processors, that this really is not only how they set themselves apart, but it's also how they protect their product. So when you set up a standard, let's say for agro-processors, we know we have a lot of pepper sauce makers, we have a lot of seasoning makers, sauces. If a group of producers get together, they have their individual products, but they may have like a quality seal that says, look, these products were produced in these conditions, and this is the quality that we are guaranteeing when you see that quality seal. So it's those kinds of things on the shelf that go beyond, let's say, what happens in the lab. The lab is really an enabler. They support the process, but it's for producers to kind of understand how they can distinguish their products on the shelves.
But let me be devil's advocate here. Is it a bit unrealistic though? Because obviously, if I am moving into, and I just mean at this time, it is obviously the end goal, there's no doubt about that. But if I am starting off putting out, whether it's cacao or some kind of produce, and it takes more investment for me to be able to meet these international standards, and my first market will have to be the local market, it drives up the cost and my sustainability within the business itself. How do we overcome that? Is it perhaps grants specifically to producers, or access to capital at least for producers to be able to meet these standards? How do we overcome it, if not going back and correcting what currently exists, or at least from this point forward?
Okay, so one, I don't think it's unrealistic, because even when you're producing for the local market, your local market has international competitors in it.
That's true.
So you are still being held to that standard, even if you are in your local market. The local market is no longer local. People travel, people are exposed to international advertising. All of these things help to set consumer expectations. So you really do have to go to that market local and go with the mindset that you need to be able to compete against what comes in. Compete Caribbean, I know, has done a lot of work, and through the Caribbean Growth Forum, there's been a lot of assessments about what are the constraints that the private sector faces, especially the small, medium enterprises. And yes, access to capital is an ongoing challenge. And it's not only access to capital, it's also access to technical assistance, because there are some companies that could have all of the money in the world, but still there's a know-how challenge. So I think that you have I think it's the Belize Development Bank, is it called here?
DFC,
Development Finance Corporation.
Yeah.
That's one entity that I know the bank has worked with to do on lending to the private sector, as well as to provide some technical assistance. I think that it's access to capital and access to technical assistance that has to be sort of married. And I also think that if our businesses are encouraged to form more clusters, then it in fact would leverage their capacity to access the capital and the technical assistance, so that you can get more sectoral impact, as opposed to one company trying to foot the bill, let's say for ISO 22000 certification or HACCP, that you have clusters and sort of sectoral approaches to getting
like
these standards. Exactly. So, and I know Baja, for example, has got some auditors trained in terms of HACCP and so on. So I think that's where we can sort of put heads together to arrive at some workable solutions. It's not an overnight thing. What you really are doing is trying to encourage that culture of excellence and encourage your producers to understand what the standards are. There's nothing that says you have to meet all of the standards one time,
and
but
minimum,
you can pick as you go. Do a building blocks approach.
There's just one just to complement Andrea's answer here. One of the things that is important in terms of standards, we do know that it improves the bottom line. We do know that. And a good example of it is reducing waste. And a bigger company can tell you by implementing a quality management system or putting in ISO 22000, how that helps to reduce waste, and that helps to reduce cost. So for a micro
those are the unforeseen benefits that people don't always.
For a micro enterprise, maybe that might be a little bit difficult, but still, it's still important because you may be doing something and your practices and your processes for a long time. But here comes in an auditor and tells you, hey, you can do this differently and reduce the cost in terms of your waste. And that is how you help to improve the bottom line of your product.
So like the example I gave with the lab when I said other people in the organization have to change what they do. So you need to buy reagents or you need to buy seeds for the nursery. Well, you can't just go and buy them. You have to evaluate the suppliers, you have to look at what you bid, and you look at everything to ensure value for money. So all the way through this process, it's value for money. And I'd say it like this, it's a function of the growth curve of the business, so as it grows, but it's like education. It can be expensive, but boy, try ignorance.
It's worth the investment.
When you look at CPBL, for example, and I say you look at one of the juice bottles, you will see it's ISO. But that's also a commitment to the local market because Belizeans first. So we want to ensure that Belizeans get the highest, not only in taste, but in quality. Right? Now, this is something that maybe we need to market to differentiate that product. Apart from the other drinks that are around, because we have a lot of drinks that masquerade as juices, but it's a commitment to ensure that while CPBL is the big entity in the Caribbean, and in terms of juice and CARICOM, so we're the big boys. There's a commitment
your local market
to the local market
doesn't know it as well. You're right that there's a marketing effort that can be added in. It's when we say our lobsters are red lobster, people say, oh wow, really? It suddenly tastes better now. Let me just, because we're quickly running out of time for the conversation, but I want to talk about opportunities that you're looking forward to now that you have been able, through this project, to attain your accreditation.
Okay, in terms of CJ, in terms of the lab, as Andrea mentioned, it's positioned us now to be a regional center of excellence, being the first ISO 025 accredited citrus lab in the region. And when I say region, that's both Central America and the Caribbean. It means that for the tests that we are accredited for, HLB is one of them, that if another lab, and there are other labs that have started the process, they will then have to come to us as a reference lab to do the interlab testing. In the case of our Plant World Nursery, we are right now working with Legacy Fund to do something that has never been done, to offer equity investment opportunity into an agriculture investment. So we are right now offering shares in Plant World. And when you're looking at what Plant World is, it's a part of a value chain in CJ that has a lab to support it, with shoot tip grafting and different things like that. We could come back and talk to you about that some other time. But it also sets up the opportunity for investors, local and foreign, that when they come in, they know that they're working in an entity that is doing precision agriculture, but also that you look at accountability, you look at transparency, you look at ethical behavior of the staff from top to bottom, which is, it gives confidence. So if we...
And a competitive edge.
Big time. So when you put all of it together, we say it's a resource-based competitive advantage. You can't find any entity that has a nursery of that caliber with a quality management system supported by a lab and has the research and technical support from the professionals that we have at CRY. I'd just like to take the opportunity to thank Andrea for the work she did for us. We were working at QMS looking somewhere in the future to get to ISO, and she walked into the door and said, I think we got some help through foreign trade, right?
Was it 2 years, the full scope of the project?
It's about a 2-year
process. For the lab, well, and the lab has gone from not being accredited to about a month away from being accredited in a little over a year, which literally meant that the people there had to work Saturdays and Sundays. There's a joke because a couple people needed to do operations, not urgent, and they actually schedule who would go first to be able to meet the deadline. So it takes a lot of commitment. You could have all the money, but if you don't have committed professionals to get it done, it won't work. So I want to thank them.
She's never seen people so excited about working.
I was going to ask if the accreditation includes good health care plans for your workers.
No, they didn't get sick because
Go ahead, Jose.
For us, I think that, like I said, for an institution that has been on the books for 25 years, I think it's a significant step for the Belize Bureau of Standards. I think we're pushing a new frontier in terms of the offer of calibration services and improving the measurement system in the country. That has never been done over all this time that the Bureau has been in existence.
The 5 areas, if you could include that as well so people can know.
Sorry?
Yeah? If you can include the five
the 5 areas.
The 5 areas,
it would be fine mass, grand mass, temperature, volume, and dimensional metrology.
Okay, great.
And the last thing is we also are looking to become a reference laboratory in one of the magnitudes, so perhaps in either temperature or mass, so that Belize we recognize that our market is small. That's a reality. You talked about cost. To sustain a lab that is accredited, there's a cost to that. So we cannot not only look at the market that we have in Belize, but we need to look outside. So we're looking at Central America, we're looking at Mexico, the Yucatan area, we're looking at, that's the vision, to look at CARICOM, that the Bureau can offer its services to labs outside or to anyone who wants to send a piece of equipment to Belize. And so that's an important step for us. I think that's one of where we're headed.
The opportunity.
It's an amazing,
amazing. And lastly, Andrea, as you get ready to close off the project, what happens now? Is it close the books and good luck, or is there a bit of additional support that is provided?
So we expect that the 11th version of the European Development Fund will come with additional funds. These facilities will be topped up, and so what we will be doing is working with our partners at the European Union to look at those projects that have been very, very successful and where there's natural part 2 for the projects, that we would give those priority for replenished funding. So that is certainly an opportunity. The bank is also going to be working very closely with our partners in the region in terms of regional institutions like the Caribbean Regional Organization for Standards and Quality to further its own mandate. The bank's very charter commits the bank to supporting regional cooperation and integration, and we certainly will be redoubling our efforts in the coming year or two to be a lot more out there in supporting regional programming. So CrossQ would be one agency that we will be rolling out programs with. So I think that we are going to be focusing through our Special Development Fund a lot on this whole question of quality infrastructure. There is a regional strategy, and I'm sure that Jose will be talking about in the coming months once it's approved. And that,
Chairman of CrossQ.
yes, he is. And so that regional strategy is really going to work to pull all of the countries in CARICOM not only onto the same page, but up to the same level in a very complementary and strategic way. So the region itself will have, I think, a significantly enhanced competitive advantage in terms of trade facilitation.
It's the only region that has developed a regional plan.
Yes, yes, yes.
Okay.
So
We
regional
can definitely
integration
talk
at
about
work.
that more another time.
Yes.
If we can tie you down for another
Yes.
interview. But we want to thank you for stopping in today, for
right.
sharing all this information with us. We appreciate it greatly. And as I think we've all echoed through the conversation, it is not just about meeting the market requirements outside. It's also beneficial to us as Belizeans as well. Right? Thank you very much for being
Thank
here.
you so much.
We're going to go ahead and take a break, and when we come back, we'll be talking about a recently concluded suicide prevention training. Very important information coming up after the break.